Hello, hello, and welcome to BSB Preview. The month is July, but it's our August edition. Our August new releases are being previewed for the next couple of hours. Thank you so much for being here. And while you guys are doing that, I have a question for our panelists, and that is, what themes in your book are important to you? Vali, why don't you start us off?
Well, this month's book is Calumet. It is about somebody who goes back to their high school reunion. And I think the theme of the book is making peace with your past. We are very different people than we were in high school. And the older we get, the more different we become.
I love that. That's great. David, how about you? What theme in your book is important to you?
Well, of course, my new book is Death Foretold. It's a murder mystery, so I guess the theme is murder. But it's also a love story because it's the ongoing story between Heath and Alan. So I think that love prevails over all, even murder. So there you go.
I love that. Love prevails over murder. There's a tagline for your next book. Jade, how about you? What theme in your work is important?
My upcoming book is Her Countess to Cherish, which is a Regency romance. And I think one of the most prominent themes is about family. One of the characters, she starts the book by marrying into somebody's family. And throughout the book, she has to learn how to navigate both that relationship and the relationship with her sister-in-law, who she kind of never thought about before entering into this marriage. So it's kind of about the connections that you make, when you take on a new family as your own. And family is very important to me, so that was important for me to write about.
Well, I like that, and all the various definitions of what that means to people. Awesome. So unfortunately, Eden and Michelle could not be here tonight. Something going on in the UK that is hotter than BSB. But I do have recorded readings from them so that you can hear all about their latest. So I'm going to play those first. And let's start with Eden Darry, who is reading from her latest release, Quiet Village.
I am Eden Darry, and I'm going to be reading from my new book, The Quiet Village, which is out in August. The bit I'm going to read is an extract from early on in the book when something strange has been lurking in the bushes, and my characters, Collie and Lana, are starting to kind of get a sense of its presence and that it's not very nice. The book is about a woman whose sister dies and she takes care of her niece. They move to the countryside and basically get stalked by something. So I will read it now. Collie put the DVD back in its case and switched off the TV. Lana had taken herself off to bed. Collie said she'd look in on her, not knowing if Lana was too old for that now or not. Either way, she hadn't said anything, not that she would. Collie got the impression Lana was on her best behaviour. Aside from the grief, there was a stiffness and formality that hadn't been there before. Collie hoped it would go away. The last thing Lana needed was the stress of being on her best behaviour on top of everything else she was going through. Collie thought she'd call Tony in the morning and see what he thought. As she switched off the light in the living room, she heard a scream and the sound of a dog barking ferociously. What the bloody hell was that? It sounded like it came from the front of the house. Collie remembered there was one other house on their drive, positioned up a small drive of its own. Should she go and check or just call the police? Ordinarily, she wouldn't hesitate to go and look, but she had Lana to worry about now. Collie, what was that noise? Collie turned to see Lana standing on the stairs, looking worried. I don't know. Listen, I'm going to go and see. Keep the door locked and don't come out, all right? Collie said. Lana nodded. Collie was very aware of the thing that marked her door earlier. Was this part two of that, or was someone genuinely in trouble? Of course, it might be nothing at all. A number of times in London, she'd been ready to dial police when she heard screaming, and it turned out to be drunk people walking home. This wasn't London, though. Collie stepped outside into the night. She breathed in deep and started walking up the path. You couldn't see the other houses from this angle. It was totally obscured by trees. Collie strained her ears to listen for any other sounds. Nothing. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. Collie used the light from her phone to guide her way. There were no lights down here at all, and the moon was still just a sliver in the sky. She started up her neighbour's small drive, and as she came round the bend, she saw lights blazing in the downstairs window. and the front door was wide open. Collie started to call out when something hit her from behind. Lana peeked through the curtains in her bedroom. Her window looked out onto the driveway and she saw Collie and her torch bobbing their way up the path before she disappeared up the neighbour's drive. Was this to do with whatever banged into their door this morning? Lana thought the thing in the bushes on the drive was just her imagination. But what if it was real? What if there really was something lurking there? But that wasn't possible, was it? How many times had her mum told her there was no such thing as monsters? So many times that Lana believed it. What if her mum was wrong? Lana had been getting into bed when she heard the scream. She was used to hearing things like that in London. Idiots being noisy because they were drunk or just messing about. But out here it was strange. Everything was so quiet, and at night all you could hear were the owls and foxes, night animals. Lana waited for the light from Collie's phone to reappear. Why did she go and look? Why didn't she just call the police? After Mum died, when Lana found out someone put her picture online as a dead woman's daughter, she'd been desperate to get away, go somewhere where nobody knew her. Collie suggested the country and she jumped at it. Now she was beginning to wonder if she'd made the right decision. She missed her house, she missed her friends, and she missed her life. Who let a 10-year-old make decisions anyway? Collie did. Lana could have asked for a pony and Collie would have gotten her one. Lana carried on staring out the window. Where was Collie? Out of the corner of her eye, Lana saw something move. She cried out and jumped back from the window. Collie's out there with it. Lana ran downstairs and grabbed a knife from the kitchen cupboard. It was as long as her arm, but it still felt useless and weak. She might as well have been holding a banana. Only silver will stop that thing. And that was a ridiculous thought. It wasn't a werewolf. Those things were make-believe. All the same, Lana reached back to the drawer and pulled out an ornate cake knife Collie only used for special occasions like cutting birthday cake. She said it belonged to Collie's mother and was made out of pure silver. Lana wasn't sure if Collie was just winding her up, as usual, but it wouldn't hurt to take it just in case. Lana stepped out into the garden path. She'd forgotten to put on shoes, but at least she had 2 knives. She felt stupid and small and useless. But she wasn't going to let that thing get Collie. She hadn't been able to help her mother, but she wasn't going to lose her aunt as well without at least trying to help her. Lana made her way cautiously up the path. The gravel chips were rough beneath her feet, but at least the ground was dry. Her attention was fixed on the bushes and on trying not to run back into the house. Her heart hammered in her chest, and the cold night air made her cheeks sting. Nevertheless, she kept on. She got to the gate. Suddenly, from her left came a loud rustling. Something was coming. Lana widened her stance and held the knives up, ready for whatever came out, and tried desperately not to be afraid. She felt something move up behind her and almost bolted, but just as quickly realised whatever was behind her wasn't it. Was it Collie? She didn't dare turn to look, but Collie would have said something. Whatever it was, it gave Lana confidence and made her feel almost protected. It was good. She planted her feet and prepared to face the thing in the bushes.
Oh my gosh, so I decided to play that one first so that we could all sleep easy tonight. Hopefully there'll be a couple hours between that scene and when we're all tucked away in bed, because it gives me the heebie-jeebies. All right, I'm also curious what Eden would say about what themes are important in her work. Who knows? Okay, I do have a coupon code for 15% off ebook pre-orders for these guises. Guises, is that a word? I don't know. It is now. You're now guises. Books. I will put that in the chat very soon. I am now going to play M.A. Binfield, who is going to read from her latest book, Never Be the Same.
Hi, I'm M.A. Binfield. I'm going to be reading from my forthcoming romance. It's called Never Be the Same. I don't have a copy of the book, but here's a poster. This is a opposites attract contemporary romance between Olivia, who's a sort of hot as hell TV star, and Casey, her London driver that's been hired to drive her around London while she and the rest of the cast are on a promotional tour. Here we go. Casey watched as Olivia did everything she was told without a murmur of complaint. The photographer had dressed her up in a pinstripe suit and bowler hat and just handed her a long umbrella with a wooden handle to play with. That's great. Could you put your hands on it? On the umbrella, stick your ass out a little bit. Yeah, like that. Like you're a really sexy Gene Kelly or something. The photographer snapped away as she spoke. Maybe lift it to your shoulder like a rifle. That's it. Keep looking at the camera like that. Perfect. Casey was sitting at the back of the room in semi-darkness, watching with rapt attention. Olivia looked amazing. She was wearing a suit without a shirt underneath. It was tastefully done, but it was impossible for Casey's blood not to feel hot at the sight of Olivia dressed like that. When they had arrived an hour ago, Casey expected to wait in the car like usual, but Olivia had insisted she come inside and keep her company during the shoot, and she couldn't say no, not after what Olivia had just done for her. And if she was honest, she didn't want to be away from Olivia either. The experience with her mom, seeing how well Olivia handled it all, how solid she was, made Casey feel all kinds of other feelings on top of the attraction she felt whenever Olivia was anywhere near her. Oh, okay, that's fantastic. The photographer lowered her camera. Let's do that cocktail party scene and then we'll call it done. Not done. We still need to do the actual interview. The interviewer, Alice, spoke from a chair on the other side of the room. Casey didn't like her at all. She'd been asking questions of Olivia the whole time they'd been there, and it seemed to Casey as if she was trying to catch Olivia off guard. She had the feeling Olivia didn't like her either. She kept her answers short, and when Alice asked whether Olivia ever had trust issues when it came to relationships, for obvious reasons, Olivia gave her a withering really and shook her head wearily. Casey had no idea what Alice meant, but it was clearly something that made Olivia unhappy and annoyed. The temptation to Google Olivia to find out things about her rose up again, but she resisted. She wasn't going to do that to Olivia. She was going to let her decide what she wanted to tell Casey and when. Olivia tipped her hat off, left it on the chair, and walked toward her. The sight of Olivia approaching in that low-cut suit sent her libido into overdrive, and Casey felt a little ashamed of the reaction. The outfit was a thirst trap, and she'd fallen in head first. Still awake back there? Olivia's tone was light and teasing. Very awake. I'm a big fan of musicals. I was waiting for you to give us a chorus or two of Singing in the Rain, actually. You wouldn't say that if you heard me sing. Small children have been known to cry and animals hide. That bad, huh? Olivia nodded and Casey started to smile. What? I'm just thinking about how much it rains here in England and how cold the winters are. You'd catch a definite chill walking from the underground to your swanky office in the city in that outfit. The suit artfully covered Olivia's breasts, but the creamy skin of her chest and the curves of her cleavage were visible, and the effect was disgracefully sexy. You're sitting back here worrying that I might catch a cold. Olivia said the word slowly, sexily. That was not the impact I was hoping to have. What can I say? I'm a very caring sort of girlfriend. She accented the word with speech marks. It was the first time either of them had acknowledged her mom, mistaking them for lovers. I'm the kind that would make you put on a warm scarf and send you off to the office with a healthy packed lunch and a kiss on the forehead. Casey was flirting, kind of. Olivia looked at her for a beat without saying anything, and Casey felt the best kind of tension between them. Well, you're definitely going to be worried about me catching a chill when you see this next outfit. Olivia moved into the curtained-off changing area at the back of the room with a swagger, and Casey couldn't help but grin. Being around Olivia had stopped being a trial and started to feel good, probably a little too good. And because of that, she needed to guard herself better. She had another 10 days of Olivia's company, and that was that. Olivia was off to the next city on their European tour and would probably forget all about the driver she'd had in London. Casey was pretty sure Olivia left a trail of people who'd fallen for her charms behind her at every stop. She sighed before distracting herself with her phone. The curtain was pulled back and Olivia stepped into the room wearing a short, blood-red dress that looked like it had been painted on. Casey wasn't proud of the up and down look that she gave Olivia, but her legs, her curves, the heels she was wearing to match the dress caused a throb of arousal low down in Casey's centre, and not staring somehow seemed impossible. When she returned her gaze to Olivia's face, she saw that Olivia was blushing. "You look amazing," Casey couldn't help but say it. Positively sinful, but also amazing. "I'm channeling Susie." Olivia smoothed a hand down the dress. "I'd never have the confidence to wear this as plain old Olivia." She hesitated, seeming nervous. "I can't imagine anyone, including Susie, could wear that dress and look as good as you do right now." Casey meant it. It wasn't a lie. "Well then, I guess Susie and I are both glad you like it." Olivia smiled, her gaze holding Casey's for an instant before heading back to the brightly lit area at the front of the room. "Damn." Casey let out a breath. The pulsing between her legs was letting her know that her attraction for Olivia was not, despite her best intentions, going anywhere. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of the readings. See you soon. Bye.
Well, damn. A little bit of spooky and a little bit of sexy. And what are we going to have next? I don't know, but I'm ready. David, why don't you jump in next? A little bit of history. Let's hit all the bases. Everyone else can turn off their videos. Please intro your book and you can start reading whenever you like.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I'm Dave Pederson, and my new book is Death Foretold, and it's the 7th in the new Heath Burnington murder mystery series. It takes place in Milwaukee in 1947, and in this scene, Heath has been called into the police chief's office unexpectedly. Heath is investigating the all-seeing Almanzo to see if he was a legitimate spiritualist or a fraud. And since his investigation is ongoing, he can't imagine what the chief wants to see him about. Let's drop into the chief's office and see if we can't find out, shall we? The chief was seated behind his massive oak desk as I entered, a frown on his jowly face. He appeared deep in thought. His bushy eyebrows, I noticed, were moving up and down rather comically, like two woolly caterpillars dancing the jitterbug. I closed the door behind me and cleared my throat. "You wanted to see me, Chief?" I moved in front of his desk and waited, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. He looked up at me and leaned back in his chair, which creaked rather loudly, crossed his hands over his stomach, and drummed his thumbs against his chest. "Yes. What brings you in on a Sunday morning?" Just some research on spiritualism for the Firestone case." "Right. About that. I'm glad you're here, actually. I was going to have Miss Blake call you at home before I saw you come in." "Oh? What for?" "Because something's come up I thought you might be interested in. A dead body was found in an alley downtown this morning by some trash collectors. A wallet was found on him, and his wife made a positive ID a short while ago. I just got off the phone with the morgue." Well, gee, that doesn't sound good, but I'm not on call this weekend, Chief. Spelling is. Shouldn't you be telling him this?" "Normally, yes, but the dead man is Almanzo Firestone. The all-seeing Almanzo." "You're kidding. He's dead?" I couldn't believe my ears. Death and murder happen all the time, especially in my line of work, but I was startled by this news. "Dead as the proverbial doornail. Murdered, in fact. Shot twice. No witnesses that we know of, no suspects, and no apparent motive. As of yet, anyway." Holy cow. Yeah, and that's not all. He was apparently caught with his pants down. Literally. Since you were investigating him anyway, I want you on the case. I know this guy was a huckster, but he was a popular one and rather famous in some circles. So keep it quiet, as much as you can anyway. Try to keep the seamy details out of the papers. Sure, I understand, Chief. Good. Some fellow from one of the radio stations was already nosing around the morgue, and one of the Sentinel reporters just rang up. But we only gave them the basic information at this point. They don't waste time. No, they don't. I had Miss Blake type up the preliminary report from the police who responded and were first on the scene. Here, look it over. He sat upright and picked up a file folder from the top of his rather messy desk. I took it from him and glanced at it briefly, skimming it. It says here nothing appears to have been missing. His watch and wallet, with the cash still in it, were on his person. Correct. Rules out robbery, most likely. Interesting. I read a bit further down to where the description of the victim was listed. And I see what you mean about being caught with his pants down. I looked up at the chief, who was staring at me. Yes, rather embarrassing. I'd say quite curious and unusual. When did it happen exactly? Still waiting on the autopsy results to narrow down the time of death. He had a show last night at 6, and it ended a little before 8. So sometime after that. The garbage men found his body around 5 this morning. He was supposed to have a matinee performance today at 1. Yes, I know. I was going to go to it as a part of my investigation. And per your request, I'd set up a private consultation with him afterward for a crystal ball reading. That's right. I remember you mentioning that. The show will be canceled, I'm sure. The wife just left the morgue after identifying him. I had a black and white drive her back to the Blatts Hotel where she and Firestone were staying. Anyone else traveling with him, Chief? Oh, I'm sure there was, but you'll have to check with the Blatts. Ask for the general manager, Elmer Suskind. Use my name. We go back a few years. He's a good man. He's honest. If you need anything from him or the hotel staff, I'm sure he'll give you his full cooperation. I'll have Miss Blake telephone him and let him know to expect you, as I'm sure you'll want to at least speak to the wife. And keep me apprised of any developments. Any questions? No, sir. Not that I can think of right now. Okay, good. Oh, and I asked the lab to send up the crime scene photos to your desk as soon as they're ready, along with the autopsy report when Fletcher finishes it. Well, that's always a good place to start. I'll get right on this. I know you will. You're dismissed then. Yes, sir, I said. I tucked the folder under my arm and left his office, still stunned by the news. So, who killed the all-seeing Almanzo, and why was he found with his pants down around his ankles? You'll have to read it to find out.
What? Seriously? That was awesome.
Thank you.
I love your background, Trick. I feel like you have just elevated the reading for every author ever. We might have to steal you for BSB Grow so you can teach us how it's done.
Sure, happy to.
I love that. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about this series, because this, I don't even remember what number book this is, but it's
7.
Wow, 7 books. So tell us a little bit about what this series is and how this book fits in.
Sure. So it's the Heath Burnington murder mystery series. Each book is a standalone murder, and Heath Burnington is the gay detective that solves the crimes, usually with the help of his love interest and police officer Alan Keyes, who's always in the background helping Heath out. And it's also a love story, as I alluded to earlier, because it's about the budding and growing romance between the two of them, and the relationship goes to somewhat of a new direction in this book also, which is kind of exciting. So it's been really fun to see both characters grow throughout the series. My last book, Prelude, was a prequel, which took place before any of them. And that was kind of a fun book to write too, because it gave a lot of backstory But this book, they're back in 1947 in Milwaukee, and the relationship is in full swing.
Awesome. Thank you. All righty. Eeny, meeny, miny. Let's go with Allie Valley for a little bit of contemporary before we switch back to historical.
All right.
Allie, please go ahead and intro your book, and you can start reading whenever you're ready.
Okay. This is Calumet. Comes out August the 1st. It is, I think, an experience we've all had, or hopefully we've all had, is going back to your high school reunion. I've been twice. It gave me the idea for this book. There's some pseudo true stories in here. But it's sometimes not easy to go back, especially if you grow up in a very small southern town and you are gay. So Dr. Jackson Levine now is a professor in California. She's received the invitation to her 15th year class reunion, and she has no interest at all in going. So this is kind of, but her best friend, another professor at the same university, wants her to go. So the invitation sat in Jackson's office drawer for the next week, and the only one who wanted to talk about it was her best friend, Bert. He'd been hounding her for days to get her to agree to join him. Why in the world he wanted to go back to a place that didn't hold many happy memories, especially for him, was a mystery, but he wanted to go. She had a short window of time before he told Margot about it, and she'd have nowhere to hide. Margot was curious about her childhood and asked about it all the time. It was something she liked talking about. Her family was like every other Southern family, full of people others like to call eccentric. Behavioral sciences had other names for it, and there was an extensive research on each condition that stemmed from one form of mental instability or another. The last time her family had gotten together in Orange Beach, Alabama for a reunion about 12 years ago, they'd spent the whole time whispering to one another. That had stopped whenever she walked into any room, but she hadn't said anything. Surprised she'd been invited at all. Yep, there'd been one big secret, and they weren't sharing with her, and that was fine. She didn't need a crystal ball to guess what it was. It was no secret that she was gay and was going to hell faster than an adulterous Satan worshiper. That long weekend was enough to drive her to alcohol, and she'd still be drunk in a ditch right now if she hadn't possessed a stronger willpower than the average bear. Dr. Levine, a young woman standing in front of her, appeared worried. Are you okay? Sorry, did you say something? Great, that's all she needed. Blanking out at work because she was thinking of things not worth remembering was just fantastic. I was wondering if you knew the book we were reading next. I'm teaching the fucking class, so yes, I do. It was the way she wanted to answer sometimes, but the kids appeared so earnest she didn't have the heart. Asking questions like that was their way of breaking the ice with her, so she grinned and Control-Alt-deleted her brain to reboot it. Stop by my office and pick up the reading list. Ask my assistant for it, and she'll be happy to get you up to speed. Want to grab a coffee and talk about it? This young woman was something else. She was gorgeous and had the body to match. I only see students during office hours, sorry. Her phone rang, saving her from any more of this innocent flirting. She answered with, hey, gorgeous, waving as the student left, looking disappointed. And you wonder why I love you so much. You always make me smile when you answer the phone, Margot said. Are you busy? Not at the moment. I was walking to class so I could sit and start writing up my test. Her worries evaporated at the sound of Margot's voice. For once in her life, she had gotten it right by taking a chance. Margot was the real deal when it came to returning her love. Does this mean all the cute girls on campus are suddenly in love with English and trying to trade certain favors for a good grade? You were the only one who offered that, darling, but you should be proud. You got that grade all on your own. She laughed at the memory of Margot trying the same thing, only she'd been much more persistent. It was the only time in her teaching career that she'd gone home hard, wet, and extremely horny. Margot's visits were an exercise in temptation. That's the only reason I don't handcuff myself to you every morning when you leave for work. Now that I know how to make you sweat, you could admit you were tempted. She could imagine the smile on Margot's face. Is there a person alive who wouldn't be tempted? You are, my love, the one woman who fuels my dreams, not to mention my desires. I thought that even when it was inappropriate for me to even contemplate it. Good comeback, baby. Listen, I'm due on set soon, but Mama called and invited us for dinner. She heard Margot snap her fingers. Do not spend the rest of the day trying to think of reasons you can't go. Would I do that? Yes, Margot said with no hesitation. I know you, Dr. Levine, and you have to realize Daddy doesn't really want to kill you. Margot laughed and she had to join in. He has a funny way of showing that, and we'll talk about this later. There's a few students waiting for me. She waved to the group and headed into the classroom. Oh no, we'll talk about it now. Repeat these words, Margot ordered. I will be at dinner tonight. I will be at dinner tonight. That didn't sound very convincing, but I'll take it. It was a pleasant afternoon until she glanced up and saw Bert waiting on her again. Unequivocally, no. Unequivocally, that's harsh. You just have to sort out your feelings and you'll be fine. Bert softened his voice, trying a new tactic. He cocked his head to the side and seemed to be trying to appear sympathetic. She took a deep breath, not wanting to pop his bubble, and jammed her papers in her bag. You think that's my hang-up? If I haven't been perfectly clear, I just don't want to go. Besides, it makes no sense. It's a 15-year class reunion happening 16 years after the fact. They actually had the first 5-year reunion at 6 years, and they said buying decorations makes more sense in increments of 5, so they went with it. As a man with a doctorate in math, it really doesn't make sense to me, but that whole town is full of idiots, so you just have to learn to let it go. She shook her head and he frowned. I'm not going. That is.
Oh, she is so going. She is so going. She also seems like really happy. And so now I'm kind of worried about what's going to happen when she gets there. And this is a romance. And oh, dear.
Oh.
So
there's a surprise waiting when she goes back.
So Allie, this story has kind of an interesting history. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how this story first started and how it became a book?
It started, I'm trying to think how long ago that was, but I got an interesting call from someone who asked me to write a kind of a novella, quite not that as long as a novella. So this actually turned into a short film, but it was just a very small portion of the book. So we changed a little bit and made it into a full story, especially, like I said, I went to a class reunion 4 years ago, and it was an interesting, very interesting experience. I think the one, my favorite line of the whole night was like somebody saying, I don't remember those boobs. It was like, yeah, no, I have to agree with you. So some of my classmates have had a little work done. So, but there, like I said, there's some pseudo true stories in here. So it was, well, once the book comes out and people get a chance to read it, maybe I'll let you guess which ones, and then I'll give away some books.
Awesome. I love that. So can people find the film if they want to watch it?
Yes, it's actually, if you Google Guillory's Little Secret, you will be able to find, I think it's still online. It was, if you've heard of Annabeth Gish, she actually played Guillory. So, but if you don't want to know what the secret is, then don't watch the film until you read the book.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Allie.
Thank you.
Next up, we have the lovely Jane Walsh, and we are going back in time again. Jane, please intro your book and take it away whenever you're ready.
My name is Jane Walsh, and I write queer historical, specifically Regency romance. So if you enjoyed watching Bridgerton on Netflix this year, but you wanted it to be way more gay, then you might like my upcoming book, Her Countess to Cherish, which is set in the same time period, early 1800s England. So this book is about Beatrice Everson, who has schemed her way into becoming the Countess of Sinclair, only to discover upon her marriage that her husband is kind of a jerk. So she leaves him behind in London and goes to visit friends in the country, and decides to pursue an affair with her social acquaintance, Mr. George Smith. However, George is actually Georgina, a non-binary bigender person who identifies as both male, George, and female, Gina. Georgina goes by both he, his, and she, hers pronouns. and this particular scene is written as she, hers. At the time of this reading, Beatrice thinks that George and Gina are two separate people. She wants to have an affair with George, but she cannot stand Gina, who she thinks is an insufferable do-gooder. So in this scene, Beatrice has arrived at the country estate to visit her friends, and she's come across Gina enjoying a snifter of brandy before dinner. Miss Beatrice Everson swanned into the library before dinner, and the air felt thick with heat and tension and the rich scent of jasmine. She filled Georgina's eyes with quick flashes of imprints, a cloud of brown curls, a smear of cherry red lip stain, the froth of petticoat near a slim ankle. Miss Everson, Georgina said, then caught herself. Lady Sinclair now since your marriage, isn't it? Lady Georgina, what a surprise. Lady Sinclair said. Her eyes wandered from the pearls nestled in her hair down to the cut glass beads on her shoes. Georgina hated hearing her full name on other people's lips. It felt much more intimate to her than hearing either of the halves of it. Please, call me Gina. Oh, of course, Gina. How could I forget the lack of formality that you insist upon? But Georgina had heard far, far worse from people far more dangerous than a bored social climber, so it was easy to disregard her sneer. How are you and Lord Sinclair these days? She asked, infusing her voice with warmth. Lady Sinclair sniffed. We're quite fine, I assure you. Yet here she was in Wiltshire, not 1 week after her rushed marriage to the catch of the season. There was a story there. Something told her, however, that the lady would be loath to share it with her. Is that brandy? Lady Sinclair asked. Why, Gina, I didn't expect such a thing from you. You seem like more of a weak tea sort of person. Do forgive me. I don't mean to offend. Her lashes fluttered, and Georgina noticed that they had been darkened and curled. A dramatic line of kohl lined her eyes, which needed no embellishment. But she knew well enough that makeup wasn't always applied for beauty. No offense taken, she said. Tea can be very sustaining. I've also been known to enjoy a nightcap of warm milk in the evenings. Well, then you won't mind if I finish your brandy, will you? You can't mean to imbibe the whole thing yourself, after all. It's almost 2 fingers deep. It had been closer to 4 when she had poured it. Georgina had caroused with men twice her size and drank them under the table when she so pleased. She started to say that Lady Sinclair could pour herself her own damn glass, but then stopped. It wasn't worth revealing how she knew where the liquor was kept, and Lady Sinclair had a hint of strain around her eyes that indicated that she could use the drink. So she passed over the glass. Lady Sinclair took a long sip and hummed with approval. This is lovely, she said. You know, I had come to the library in search of your cousin. My dear Jackie told me that Mr. Smith is here, but I can't seem to find him. Has he told you where he went? Georgina studied the deep décolletage of Lady Sinclair's dress. Pale blue fabric marched in tiny pleats across her bodice, with delicate lace lying as light as breath on her breasts. A ribbon was tied tight beneath her bosom, which was hoisted nearly to her chin. Gathered muslin flowed down her body in a skirt so gauzy that Georgina could see the petticoat underneath, and more than a hint of leg beyond that. This was a gown that declared seduction. Although judging from the look on Lady Sinclair's face, she didn't need a dress to do the work for her. Her determination was enough to see her through. I think George is at the village tavern, Georgina said brightly. He makes friends wherever he goes. I doubt you'll see much of him while you're here. Oh, but he shall soon tire of the country bumpkins. Lady Sinclair took another sip of brandy. Georgina meant to defend the countryside and its pleasures, but all she could think of was that those lips were touching the glass where hers had once rested. How long are you planning to stay in the country? Georgina asked. It shouldn't be much of a stretch to fib about her cousin's presence for a few days. To her surprise, Lady Sinclair seemed discomfited. Well, as long as I wish, she said, and drank again. Georgina nodded. Just as she had suspected, things were unsettled between the newlyweds. She might not be able to avoid Lady Sinclair after all, if it was meant to be a long stay. I do as I please, Lady Sinclair continued, drumming her fingers on the arm of her chair. Perhaps I shall stay with 1 week, perhaps 2. Sinclair has another thing coming to him if he expects me to be biddable. Georgina nodded again. She might not quite like Lady Sinclair, But this was a notion she could wholeheartedly endorse. "There's no reason why marriage should limit your choices," she replied. "I know a great many people who eschew the entire institution." Oh yes, your blue stocking friends at your little salon in London. Lady Sinclair rolled her eyes. "I'm sure they are ever so happy with their choice. However, some of us must wed to survive." "And some of my friends must work for their living," Georgina said. "Yet you do have it very hard, don't you?" Lady Sinclair's eyes flashed, and she set the brandy snifter on the side table. "You wouldn't know the first thing about it, would you? You're wealthy in your own right, living alone with your house in Mayfair. What are the hard choices you've had to make to survive?" Georgina thought of the long years in Paris. Nights spent shivering and walking to the Duke of Hawthorne's residence across town, clad in borrowed breeches, and fighting off men who wanted to rob her, and worse. "Yes, I have lived a charmed existence," she lied, her face placid. Lady Sinclair was scrapping for a fight, her body taut as bowstring. "Do tell your cousin that I was looking for him," she said, and rose to her feet in one graceful move. "Or perhaps I shall have the pleasure of telling him in person." She whisked herself out of the room. Georgina sighed, then picked up the glass and drained the leftover brandy. Dinner tonight was sure to be interesting. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So George and Gina are an interesting character, especially in a historical context, to write the experience of being genderqueer. What changes with the history, right? Because in a contemporary context, we have language and understanding for what that means, but in the Regency period, that didn't exist in the same way. So what was it like to write that character in that period?
I kind of went with the idea that people still have the same feelings and identities that they've always had. So people experiencing and identifying with different genders today, like they felt the same way 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. It's true that there wasn't the type of language necessarily that surrounds it, but there are definitely a lot of transgender people in history that we do know about who've lived their lives as either a man or a woman, possibly both. But I more went with the idea that she's completely comfortable in her identity, and she probably expresses it with a little bit of like a modern kind of interpretation. And that's really for like the contemporary reader. Like I want them to feel comfortable with the character as it is today.
Yeah, sure. That makes total sense. I love it. All right. So we have a few minutes here left at the end. If you have questions for our lovely panelists, please pop them in the Q&A. And I will pick them up there. To start us off, I have a question for you guys. Which character is most like you?
Ooh. In any book or this book?
Yeah, no, in this book. Come on, Allie Valley. You've only written like 47 books. You can... It doesn't have to be like, you know, every aspect of you, but maybe there's one trait that you also have.
Somebody just put Cain. I wish. It solved a lot of my problems. I guess in this book, it would have to be Jackson Levine. I did feel some trepidation going back. I'm Facebook friends with some of my people I went to high school with, and it's like, how in the world did you get so crazy? It's been that long. But yeah, no, I think of the people that I went to high school with, I'm still friends with quite a few of them, but those are the ones that I would, maybe we'll have our own small reunion. But that, I think in this book, that would be the one that would be most like me.
All right, I like that. I think also your character who thinks a response, but has to kind of rewind herself and not say it out loud. I feel like that's also you, Allie.
Exactly.
Maybe
I have a filter. Believe it or not, I do.
Jane, how about you? Which character is most like you?
I suppose there's always traits in both characters that I would relate to. That's probably true of all of my books. I think probably the trait I would most relate to would be Georgina. And she's a bit of a workaholic. Like she runs a blue stocking salon in London, and she's very busy organizing kind of different events for people to go to, like literary and social events. And I've definitely felt burnout at my work before. And Georgina starts out the book like suffering from a bit of burnout herself. So I would probably mostly relate to that.
Cool. Alrighty. And David, which character is most like you?
People always think Heath Burnington is like modeled after me, but I think I'm a lot more like Alan Keyes. Just his kind of wide-eyed wonder at the world and his love of animals and his Heath is a little a little smarter than I am. He definitely dresses better than I do. And he's better looking than I am. So I think I'm definitely more like Alan. He's a little more laid back. He's more of a sidekick than the main character.
I don't know. You've got the dapper thing going on tonight. So we have a question for you, Dave. Are there plans for a Heath Barrington number 8?
Not at this time. But definitely possibility. I'm actually excited that I'm developing a new series with a new character and a new detective set in Phoenix. So a little bit older gentleman. So that'll be coming out next year. So Heath and Alan are gonna go off to their love nest for a little while. But you never know, they might be back.
Well, sure. And I'm so excited for the new series too. So definitely another one in the works. All right. So another question. Which scene in this book was the most fun to write? And why was it fun?
I'm thinking it was the part where they're talking about there's a planning committee for the class reunion, and they're talking about they run into one of their classmates who's married someone in Angola penitentiary who's serving life, but he's also in the band. So they want to hire the Angola state band to come and play at their reunion so the guy can actually attend their reunion. So I think that was fun.
Great way to make that happen. David, how about you? Which scene was the most fun to write?
Probably Aunt Verbena makes an appearance in this book again. I love Aunt Verbena, and there's a scene where she and Heath have tea at the Pfister Hotel, and she grills him about the murder of Almanzo Firestone, and she keeps getting his name wrong, and she calls him Flintstone and Firewood, and she's a fun character. I always have fun writing her, so that I would say that was probably the most fun to write.
I love that about series, that you kind of, build this connection with certain characters, and it's always so much fun to write them in. And even though they're not the main character, they're kind of, your most beloved. I think sometimes secondary characters can do that because they're often not as much work as your main characters, right? They're kind of there for comedy and
Yep.
fun, for sure. Jane, how about you? Which scene was the most fun to write?
I think probably the most fun write to scene in my novel was there's a scene where they go to basically ye old gay club in Regency, England, and it has again, like you're right, the secondary characters are really great. So I put in like a secondary character that appears in drag, and I think it's really fun and a reminder that like queer space has existed forever in different ways that people have made it, and people don't always realize that, like there were real communities of gay people that existed in these time periods. So it was really fun to write that.
For sure. And that's a great segue into our last question, which is, why is your genre important to you? What is it about this genre? And Allie, you can only pick one. Yeah, that makes it important to you. Jane and Dave, you both only write in the genre that you write in. So why did you pick that one? Why is it important? Jane, why don't we start with you, since you were just speaking to that?
I've been reading Regency romance my whole life. Like I picked them up when I was probably way too early, and it's just been part of my reading experience since I was very young. So I've always wanted to write in this genre, and I'm very excited to have the opportunity to do so.
Awesome. Allie?
Well, I like writing romance because, I mean, what girl doesn't love romances? So I think I have a lot of people who read those, but I like David, like to write crime novels. And I think it's one of the reasons is you get to break the rules, even if it's just on the page.
Always fun. And Dave, how about you? What is it about? Historical mystery.
You know, I've always been a little bit of an old soul. That's another thing Alan Keyes and I have in common. I grew up watching 1940s musicals and listening to all the big band music while all my friends were listening to AC/DC and some other weird bands. I couldn't tell you what they were. So I've always been fascinated by the 40s, even the 30s and 20s. And I grew up reading Agatha Christie and all the Sherlock Holmes books and all those kind of period books. So I always wanted to try my hand at that, and I really enjoy it. I kind of live the period when I'm writing. So, you know, I put my hat on and I'm good to go. So a lot of fun.
I love it. That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We are previewing our August books, and this is an awesome preview of it. Thank you to our authors for their reading. Thanks, and have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for watching.